So I happen to be a professor of Brazilian history at Brown University, but the reason I think I'm here more today, perhaps, is because I lived in Brazil during the dictatorship. I was involved in a left-wing underground organization that was legalized. I was a founder of the gay rights movement and maintain a long and deep relationship to social movements in Brazil, and go there a lot. So I don't know if you need to go there to know what's going on, but I happen to have been there, and I was at the big demonstration in Rio of 300,000 people with five of my students, doing a little tour of radical politics in Brazil. I'm going to make a few comments that are more connected to the present as opposed to the bigger picture, and we're going to disagree on analysis, which is fine. I think that the slogan that I thought was most interesting of the demonstrations was one that I actually saw in Minas Gerais. I was in Minas in Belo Horizonte for a doctoral dissertation defense, and it's not 20 cents, it's 500 years, which I thought kind of was a cute way. No era 20 centavos, era 500 anos. And I thought that was a really wonderful way of saying that this is really about not just immediate demands, but a long structural problem in Brazil that needs to be confronted in a bigger way. So I think that Alvaro has given some macro analysis of the crisis that he's talking about. I don't think it's a crisis of the regime or even the crisis of the government in the way that he predicts, but who knows? I've been really bad at predictions in the past, so I could be wrong. But I think what is true, and I agree with Alvaro on one point, which is that the Workers' Party, which came to power as, in the minds of millions of people, as a legitimate representative of the underclasses, and Lula's election as a working class person who spoke with an accent of the Northeast and didn't conjugate his verbs correctly, represented the first time in the popular imagination that someone like them could be elected. And so the first time he ran for governor in '85, the slogan was, workers vote for a worker, and that was incomprehensible to people. Why would we want to vote for a worker? They're not capable of running the country. But in 2002, the identity that people had with Lula, agora é vez dele, it's his chance to try to see if he can do that. And so he brought with him a lot of goodwill and a lot of support by mass movements. The Workers' Party, in the process of becoming a mass-based political party that could elect governors and congresspeople and mayors, also channeled the energy and the radicalization that occurred in the anti-dictatorship struggle in the 70s into traditional channels in which social movements were absorbed into the government, leaders were absorbed into state apparati, into leading ministries or being advisors to congresspeople. And so many people who came out of the 60s and 70s as radicalized became more pragmatically oriented as they grew older, and they became more accommodated into the situation. And I think this is one of the many factors in which the Workers' Party, which seemed to have promise for being the vehicle for radical social change in the country, lost its steam and also channeled a lot of that energy into more traditional politics and governance. And I think the most clear reflection of that was actually the historic letter that Lula wrote in 2002 in the elections, A Carta dos Brasileiros, which was a letter that basically said, really to a finance capital, that I'm not coming with a socialist program to challenge capitalism. We're going to find an agreement, an accord. We can all profit from this. You can become rich. Workers can become rich, and we all together can build a society. And I think that is kind of the essence of what his vision and what the vision of the Workers' Party has been, which is that there is within the margins of capitalism the possibility of an agreement where bankers and owners can make reasonable profits, and the state can be a vehicle to distribute the wealth more justly in the society, and everyone can benefit. That's a very classical social democratic vision of the country that is different from social democracy in Europe in the sense that the Workers' Party had tremendous popular support and energy, the frenetic energy of activists who would be the ones who were mobilizing in the streets for the last 25, 30 years. And what is significant about this demonstration is it wasn't actual leaders, current leaders of the Workers' Party in the streets mobilizing. It was hundreds, if not thousands, of former members of the Workers' Party, or people who voted for the Workers' Party, or people who voted for the parties to the left of the Workers' Party, or students who don't want to vote for any of the left parties who were in the streets. And I'll get back to that in a minute. Another part of I think it's really important to understand the situation in Brazil is the legitimacy that Lula has had which reflected in his being able to handpick his successor, Juma Josefi, who on one hand, had a trajectory as being a former guerrilla fighter. I'm writing a book about an organization that she was a part of. I know lots of details about her life. Who, at the end of the day, ended up, after being in prison for 3 years, joining a radical nationalist populist party in the South and moderating her politics over the years and really believing in this product of a kind of a moderate social democracy. But he could choose her as a candidate, and the economic successes of Brazil in the period after the 2008 crisis were such that the electorate could vote for her, and she could be elected. Even though she had never served in a political office, she had been more of a technocrat in terms of being a government bureaucrat and a minister of energy and the mines, and fulfilling a more technical role in the government, and not having a very strong charismatic presence or an ability to work very successfully with the complexities of building a coalition to have a majority in Congress to be able to get legislation passed. So the fact that Lula could basically handpick a successor and she could be elected speaks to the tremendous value and the strength of the Workers' Party. In spite of a deep internal crisis and accusations of corruption against key people around the president, Lula, as the Teflon president, managed to escape those attachment of those accusations against him, and Dilma was elected president. Now, in that election, 19% of the people in the first, you have to get a majority. If you don't get a majority, there's a runoff. In the first round, there was a center-right candidate who had run several times before, and Dilma, and then there was a candidate of the radical left, I don't know how you want to call it, PSOL, a left-wing group that's to the left of the Workers' Party, who is a historic figure but was, I think, a very inarticulate and ineffective candidate. And a woman named Marina, that many of you might have heard of because she was Minister of Environment and left the Lula government because of critiques over his policies, who I think channeled and captured three different constituencies. One was a kind of a hidden constituency which people weren't aware of at the time, but she was a leftist. She was a working class woman who became part of a leftist underground organization, and then got involved in the Rubber Workers Union and got involved in politics in the Workers' Party and rose and became Ministry of the Environment. But she also became an evangelical Christian recently, and that's important to her, and that was important to a sector of the Congress and of the country that is evangelical. It's about 25% of people who believe in religions are evangelical. And there was a secret kind of campaign to support her of maybe a third of those votes, I speculate, I don't think anyone really knows, were probably evangelical Christians and people who saw her as a vehicle for that view. There was also a large sector of middle class, thought broadly, of people who saw the Workers' Party either corrupt and not carrying out the standards of morality that they had held the Workers' Party to be, or middle-class people who think that the Workers' Party was too distributive of its resources. The Bolsa Familia, the guaranteed income and other things were causing it difficult to get a good maid, or the night watchman would be. And then this is a real discourse, and I really heard this. I was like, I know people from all social sectors in the society, and I was with some people from Globo who were producers because I was on a show, and they were talking to me afterward, and they were saying that. So this is not, I didn't invent this. I'm really basing it on a very empirical, very subjective interaction with many people in Brazil. So there's that whole notion of like Brazil has gone too far with Lula and Dilma, and there's too much distribution, and now people don't have desire to work because they're getting the government subsidies, which are very minimal. And then there was a sector that in the first round of elections kind of wanted to send a message and then voted for the Workers' Party in the second round. And they assumed that Dilma would win in the first round, therefore they voted for her, for Marina to do that. And I mention this because this 19% or it's 10% plus what the left of the Workers' Party might get in elections, which is 5%, reflects a small but an interesting percentage of the population. And it's one that's in flux, and I think is reflected very much in the demonstration. So the final part of what I want to talk about is what I observed in the marches and in talking to one of my best and most favorite graduate students who's at NYU now but was my undergraduate student, who was at every demonstration from the first one and had endless conversations on the email about what was happening. So I have like a infiltrator who was there watching. It's Natan. I don't know if you know Natan, but anyway. Yeah. So he was there, and at the first of the demonstrations in Sao Paulo, organized by a very interesting group of young students who were involved in the World Forum in Porto Alegre and were very inspired by a decentralized way of organizing mass-based demonstrations, and were carrying out a call for free transportation based on actually ideas, including those of the former mayor, Erundinha, who had proposed a way to have free transportation and pay for it by taxing in a different way and reorganizing social services. And so basically their demonstrations and their mobilization wasn't really mobilizing large numbers of people. And they were able to bring out a fair number in the first demonstration, the second, and then when the police decided to repress them, and the press, journalists were also repressed, and this kind of escalated the situation, and then there was kind of massive outpouring and people participating in the demonstrations as a way of showing solidarity and indicating their support. So what is that composition of the people? And again, I think no one knows, and anyone who says they know is just doesn't know. And so my impressions are as wrong as the next person's. But the movement has in it many people from the left and from the far left, or the left of the PT, who at one point could be openly participating, but there is another current which was discouraging identification with parties, and there was even sectors that were prohibiting the parties from carrying their banners. So the PSOL, the kind of the party that ran a presidential candidate, which I considered weak, and PSTU, which are the two largest kind of left formations, were forced to take down their banners. And so the demonstrations would be apolitical. And this is complex, even this story is complex, because many of the people in the Movimento Passe Livre were from those political parties and agreed to do it tactically to avoid this notion of division, but they also had to confront people who were anti-party and were resentful not only of the Workers' Party but these parties. The Workers' Party people who participated in some of these demonstrations also had their banners taken down. So there is a strong sentiment that is anti-party and anti-left party, which is not, as many people say, necessarily consolidated people of the right. And that's, I think this is a way in which, if you're in the Workers' Party, you have a reading of what happened. I was at a big debate at the Memorial of the Resistance. I gave a talk there, and it was about solidarity with the dictatorship in the 60s and 70s. But all people wanted to talk about was the president. And so you could see the people in the Workers' Party, defend the Workers' Party, are now saying these demonstrations are right-wing, to destroy Dilma, to destroy the government, and they're very dangerous. They're being manipulated by the press. And people to the left who were participating in the demonstrations said, no, this is the end of the Workers' Party. It's about to collapse. It has no legitimacy, and we're mobilizing millions of people, and there's almost an imminence of a revolutionary situation in Brazil, and this marks the first stage of that. So I think that what we have in these demonstrations is a large gamut of people participating for many different reasons. My reading of the composition was much more broad middle class than it was working class, and I think there's an explanation for that. I could be wrong, but that was my reading of it. That having to do with the fact that still, in spite of the inflation and the things that Alvaro has mentioned about sectors of the working class mobilizing, there is still a notion that this government is a government that provided things for us, and that the Bolsa Familia and other services and other activities have been good, and we see this as a government that still meets our needs. So I think those participating are more people of the middle classes, understood broadly, who have been living under a 10-year government, two governments, Lula's and then 2 years of Dilma, 3 years of Dilma, in which the discourse has been things are getting better. We have moved 40 million people into the middle classes. Everything is getting better in Brazil. Brazil has gotten the World Cup. It's got this, it's going to have the Olympics. It's getting better, and we can prove it and we can show it. And people are saying, I don't know about you, but it's not really getting better for me. Or I, from the middle classes, I went to Disneyland with Disney World when I was 10, and I'm at USP now, and it takes an hour and a half to get home from USP, and I'm frustrated. I think that this promise that we're modern and just like the United States, and when I go to New York, I go back and I get frustrated because Brazil isn't quite like New York, although the metros of São Paulo are better than the metros of New York. There's a frustration there, and that it's around education, it's around social services, it's around health. And it's ironic because many of those students aren't necessarily the ones who are feeling the pinch of these things. but that's still an important concern. And I think that is a deep tradition in Brazil of people of the middle classes identifying with popular classes and their concerns. So I think it's all in flux, and I think the one thing that I think is true not only in this country, and I think that's what happened to Occupy here, is what happens in Brazil is the electoral cycles really affect politics and political mobilization. So the one wild card is the World Cup being there next year and whether there'll be successful demonstrations against the stadium production. But I'm not as optimistic of those people who think that Brazilians are going to collapse and a tradition of not uniting around the excitement around the World Cups. And so I think that it's more likely that there will be demonstrations around the World Cups, but I'm not sure they're going to have the same impact as they did this year, but I could be wrong. And I think that the cycle of the World Cups then goes right into the electoral cycle next year. And in that regard, I think there are three options among many possible. And one is that Dilma will manage in some way to pull the rabbit out of the hat, and Brazilians do this all the time. For 500 years they've been doing this, so it's possible that could happen again. I love teaching Brazilian history because you never can predict what's going to happen, or the past is even kind of bizarre. So I think that's possible. I think Lula could actually step in and crisis manage it and be reelected. He's allowed to be reelected by the Constitution. There is an attempt to try to limit the a presidential cycle to one, but I don't think that'll pass in Congress. So I think that Dilma could decide not to run for whatever reason, and Lula could run. There's a possibility that the center-right could unite on a candidate. They have a lot of problems because they don't have a strong candidate at this point to do that. And I think we also always have the possibility of some kind of rightist, populist figure, for those of you who know Brazilian history, like Jânio Quadros or Collor de Mello, who could emerge as a figure that is, presents himself as with the people, against corruption, against the political parties, above the political parties, from a small political party, therefore not beholden to any political party, and will run. And that will be a crisis, because that is twice that's happened in the last 60 years, because Brazil hasn't had a lot of democracy in the last 60 years, because they've not had a working majority in Congress, they've been totally unable to govern. That was the situation with Jânio Quadros, and it was the situation with Collor de Mello. So, I think that the Workers' Party is not collapsed. It's there for a long time. I think it's consolidated itself, and even though it's in crisis, and I think that it will lose votes and support. And I don't think there's either a clear alternative to the left, because I think the left of the PT has not managed to present itself as a united. There's not even been an effort by PSOL and PSU to come together and say we're going to offer a united electoral front next time, which I think is unfortunate. And again, the right, I think, is still totally unable to understand this. Just one last thing. I know I'm over time. The media is very important to understand here, and if one reads Folha de São Paulo or Globo, it's really reading in every article editorials, because the media is so egregiously editorializing in every article it writes about what's happening. I mean, it's just amazing how it's clearly consolidated in its attempt in any way possible to topple this government, to have a center-right government. It might agree with some of the things this government's doing, Alvaro might argue, but it would like to topple this government and have a center-right government in power. And it's doing everything possible to do that. Whether it's first being against the demonstrations because it wasn't clear what they were, and then flipping, as they did after the day of the repression, and then now promoting these demonstrations like I've never seen them promote anything. And my God, it's just been amazing how every little demonstration is being promoted by the press. Because they want to topple I think they want to topple the PT government, the center-left government, have a center-right government. It's just much more easier to make things happen when you have your people in power, as opposed to people that you know how to negotiate with and get at things out of, but they're not your people. So that's my analysis, and it's probably wrong, but there it is.